Hi folks, you're with Tacitus today at your Pushback channel, and thank you for joining this audio live stream. In this essay, I'd like to talk about the economic structure of globalization, insofar as the globalists have inserted an economic superstructure across the world, or most of it, where market forces very rarely now drive any price outcome of goods or services. What they've set up is a system of price gouging, where prices are determined by people's capacity to pay. So that's now the determining factor. Market forces are largely irrelevant pretty much across the board, certainly in the key areas of things like energy, rent and property and these sorts of things. So it's no longer a market forces issue. It's capacity to pay. Now, just to illustrate the point, is someone I know, in fact, former work colleague. He and his wife both each inherited a house in short succession, he's doing well. He between him and his wife, they've inherited 3 houses over the last 10 years. So, and these are houses in Sydney worth millions. So they're doing rather well. But he was one house they sold a house they had, moved into one of the inherited properties. But these 2 properties they're putting out to rent. And I was talking to him about it, and he was saying that the rent isn't set by the money he needs to make, or what he thinks is fair, or what he thinks is reasonable, or anything at all. It's been driven by economics. He gets all the real estate. This is his explanation here. All the real estate agents effectively subscribe to this is what the rent should be in the area. Now they claim it's the market rent, but it's actually nothing of the sort. It's quite controlled. Because the market rate would differ. If someone's got a big mortgage to service, then they would need higher rent than someone who's got no debt to service, or whatever, or who's got problems with taxation and they want to keep the rent at a lower level to avoid paying more tax and bumping into a higher tax bracket. So there are a million reasons why rents would differ, and always used to. Certainly when I was a kid, first young guy, first renting, you would get a vast sort of spread of rents, even for the same sort of property, depending on the circumstances of the property owner. This is now different. The circumstances of the property owner are irrelevant. There is a market sort of rate of rent. And so the real estate agent who are going to manage the rental of the properties say, no, the rent should be, going around numbers, $100 a week. So he didn't need that much. So he said, no, I'll do it for $75. No. And the agent, as he explains it, went to considerable lengths to say, no, that if the market price is $100, you should ask for $105, and we'll give you a discount on the management of the property if you do what we ask you to do, and so all various incentives, and they still were a bit unconvinced. So the manager of that property firm, even came round to talk them into going with this market rate. So there was clearly more to it than that, and it looks like the whole real estate industry is fully on board with this idea that. And the guy came out, so explained with some statistics, saying, well, look, this is the household incomes of average in Sydney, and therefore people can afford to pay $100 to even a bit more, and so that's what we should do because they have the capacity to pay it. And this was constantly the refrain that the guy, so it's reported, came out. Now I did a few little sort of online inquiries and so on, and I came across there's really nothing in the mainstream media about this, which surprises me, because you think our political class would want to jump all over it because the citizens that they supposedly represent are being price gouged up the gazoo, and yet the politicians don't care. And this is, I think, principally because now politicians derive the majority of their income from real estate. That's now where the more than 50% of nearly every politician's income comes from real estate speculation and real estate property ownership. So they have a huge vested interest as a class of people in keeping the prices artificially high. But this idea of it's what people what people can afford to pay, and prices should be set on that, not based on any market forces. Now, on the other side, there can be the artificial cranking up of market forces. For example, the more migrants you bring in, the more it depresses wages but pushes up real estate prices, for example. Now, it's a little bit different because people from, say, the Indian subcontinent and certainly the peasants from rural China, of which there are many here, they're happy to live 15 or 20 to a 1 or 2 bedroom apartment, and it's about the same, if not better, than what they're used to in the countries, the poor countries or poor areas of the countries that they come from. So market forces, that do exist can be subverted by purposeful manipulation, sort of on the periphery, coming into the centre there. But coming back to this idea of a price gouging, I was having a look at basic grocery items around the world, and then looking at where these products were produced. So I tried to focus on products that were lighter, so they could be transported fairly cheaply, unlike heavy items like, I don't know, liquids or bricks or something like that, where it's quite a high transport cost, especially things like, say, milk into hot climates. Milk has to be refrigerated and is heavy to transport. So I tried to look for light things like, I don't know, pasta or something. So looking at those, and then looking at, okay, well, this is manufactured in this regional food processing factory and then distributed around the region. So the cost of manufacture is constant, and the transport would be pretty equal going around the region. So maybe a minor variance, but nothing serious. So that price should be constant. So if I'm paying, for example, $1 for that in Australia for that food item, then, and this is not perishable, by the way, $1 for that food item, then that price should be the dollar, still be $1 wherever it is, wherever it goes. But that's not so. The price variance is actually quite considerable. So the price is much higher in Australia, and even though the very efficient distribution and storage and transport system in Australia would suggest the price should be even a little bit lower here. But so if it's $1 in Australia, it's 15 cents in, say, Indonesia, which is a very poor country. So all right, then now I understand if you want to penetrate the market there, then, and you want a market presence, you have to reduce the price to something the local people can afford. I do get that, but it's the same product that you get in Sydney or in Australia. So why is it $1 here and why is it 15 cents there? Now, if you do the mathematics on, in fact, it was less than 50 cents, I think it was 12 cents. But if you do the mathematics on it and look at the average wage in each of the different countries where this product is for sale, and then you look at the cost of the product versus the average wage, then you'll see that in percentage terms, it's approximately the same as you go around the region. So the pricing of the product isn't based on the profit they need to make or the cost of manufacture plus a profit, or it's not based on any of those things. It's based purely on the capacity of the local population to pay for that item. And the percentage that it is, I mean, if it's, for example, if it's 1% of the average paycheck in Indonesia, then it's 1% of the average paycheck in Australia. It just so happens the paycheck in Australia is bigger than the Indonesian average paycheck, but it's still the same in proportion to the total paycheck. So my view on that's price gouging, because you're pitching the product at a price the local market you think that can afford to pay. Now, if you can get all the manufacturers, all the competitive manufacturers of that product to price the product on or about the same, give or take a nickel or dime here or there. If you can get them to price it the same, then you've effectively got no competition. You've neutralised competition. And on top of that, you've ensured that those products or set of products, a group of products, are being sold at a price that is a proportion of the income that's in some sort of actuarial calculations and mathematics. You say, well, this is what the population can afford to pay. But that's all centrally planned. It's equivalent to a Soviet communist centrally fucking planned economy. That's not being driven by market forces. Now, there are some aberrations here and there. For example, if I look at the price of I don't know, bananas, I mean, I'll just pick something out here, bananas. Now, there's a bit of an issue with importing bananas from third world countries or other parts of the world, but third world countries. So there are often devastating storms in the banana growing region of Australia, which cause a temporary shortage until the next crop's ready. And also it cause a lot of hardship for the farmers, destruction of their banana plantations and so on. So suddenly bananas will go from $3 or $1.50 a pound for American audiences, $3.20 a kilo or something in Australia, but it will go to $12 a kilogram. Because of the shortage of bananas. Now, they could easily bring bananas in from overseas if they wanted to, but rather than protect the farmers and give them money to rebuild their plantations because of a storm or something going through it, instead of that, they'll allow market forces to operate so that it's $12 a kilo now for bananas because it's a shortage. So they do have some issues of market forces temporarily driving prices. Now, again, there's an easy way around that. They could just bring in bananas from overseas, but they decide not to. But again, that's a controlled market. That's not market forces. They're quite happy to bring in peasant workers from overseas. They're quite happy to bring in purchasers of real estate from overseas to buy up swathes of real estate to push up the price of real estate. And it's artificially, it's not a local market condition. Yet they play a different game when it comes to bananas, as an example. But again, either way you look at it, it's a controlled economy or it's a subverted economy. And call it what you want, and it's probably both running parallel. But the issue is the market forces are not permitted to operate. Now, coming back to the real estate thing, if you look at the price of renting real estate in various areas, whether it be American cities or British or Australian or that sort of thing. Again, you see this tight relationship between capacity to pay and the rent. Now, so capacity to pay is an expression of market forces. If people have got that much extra money in their pay packets, then they will spend more on for example, housing and so on. But no, that's not the case. The amount of property is much greater in one place than another. The cost of building is much higher here than there. The interest rates here are different from there. The amount of private property owned in this area is much less or much higher than the other one. So that there are vastly different circumstances. There are also different types of households. In some societies, having 3 or 4 or even 5 generations living in the one, including cousins and that sort of stuff, living in the one household is not unusual. It's kind of how things are done. Whereas in other areas, other societies, that's quite rare. So there are also various other differences along those lines. So this idea that you can gouge people for the average wage and therefore they pay this much in for example, rent, that's again a pre-planned thing. That's not market forces driving that. And the property owners who want to deviate from this or see no reason to, they're strongly encouraged to stay tight, stay true to the prescribed pricing. So if I look at for example, 100 kilometres from downtown Sydney, and I draw a circle around, that, or on 3 sides at least. If I draw an arc around Sydney 100 kilometres out, and I look at all, for example, 3-bedroom or 2-bedroom, say 2-bedroom apartments in that band, in that area there, they all have about the same rent. Now, one may be, for example, $670. Another one maybe it's just been fully refurbed with all the latest. That may be $690. But it's in a very tight range of rental amounts, even given the distance from the city. So if you want a place that far from the city, it's got a bit of countryside, maybe views of the forest, those sorts of things, then you're going to pay about the same rent wherever you go in that 100-kilometre band. And by the way, once you spread out the 100-kilometre band from downtown Sydney, you're looking at a distance between from end to end of that band of something like 200 plus kilometres. So you're looking at vastly different areas. Some have lots of property available, some not. Some are quite mountainous, so they don't have as much. Others are flat plains, so they've got shitloads. Others have got this or that. So they're vastly different areas with different mixes of population. Some with retirees, some not, and so on. So it's inconceivable that they could be the same rent, hundreds of kilometres apart in vastly different situations and circumstances. Some are quite old properties that were built 100 years ago. Others are relatively new, this sort of thing. Again, you just wouldn't see that very tight consistency of rent pricing. So again, a very clear indication that the rent is based on a price gouging, centrally controlled economy method of running an economy. And this is the same across it could be anything. It could be meat, it could be foodstuffs, it could be all sorts of things. There's effectively a nationally controlled, centrally determined price for now many things that previously used to be, even with things like petrol. So certainly when I was a young guy, there were sometimes vast differences between petrol stations. In petrol, you get a difference of $1 a gallon between this petrol station and that petrol station. You don't get it anymore. Very tightly controlled. If there is any difference, it's like a few cents. So that's this price gouging now. Now going back to say the 1950s or early 1960s in for example Britain, if you look at the writings of the politicians and your senior public servants back in the day, they were constantly commenting on how the bigger firms, the big companies, were always trying to avoid competition, whether it was clandestine price collusion, whether it was the earlier concepts of price gouging or all sorts of things. They were wanting to. They saw competition as the great evil to their profits, the big threat to their profits. Not just a threat to their profits, competing in the market to have the best products and the best services means you had to be good. And when you had to be good, it changed. The merit-based, it becomes a very merit-based hiring system. You have to appoint people who really know what they're doing and who are good at it. Whereas in a monopoly or oligopoly or price cartel situation, your outcomes are pretty much guaranteed. So you can appoint your useless, incompetent buddies into key positions, and everything will still be fine. You can put the black lesbians into the HR department, and nobody cares. But in a merit-based situation, you can't really do that. And none of the businesses the private sector, this is again late 1950s, early 1960s Britain, none of them really wanted that. It was a constant struggle with those people, and you had the government. And looking at, say, the writings of Prime Minister Harold Macmillan back in the time, his private sort of diary, he was talking about his duty to the British citizens, and the only way to keep the people he represented, for goodness sakes, the only way to keep prices keep prices low was to ensure that there was maximum competition. He said there's no other way. He said we can't legislate it. We can't jawbone the businesses into this sort of thing. They will always go to the easiest source of profits, which is monopoly, oligopoly, cartels. And he said they will always default to that, and that's all they want. And by making sure there's lots of competition in any given segment of the market, whether it be property or motor vehicles or anything else, that's the only way to keep prices keep prices competitive. Now, I've said this before in other vids, but in terms of the average wage, the average wage back in the day, or rent for, say, a 2-bedroom apartment. Again, using rent as the great leveler, but buying a property changes, but due to interest rate variables. But with the rent, it used to be like 32% of the average wage would be spent on rent. If you look at that same property today, it takes over 70% of the average wage to rent a property. So that illustrates the difference. Now that difference has come from, the high rates of immigration allowing offshore property syndicates to buy property in Australia and Britain and so on. So a lot of it's come from that, but it's also come from this price gouging on the basis of, this is what we say people can afford to pay. Now, this is not dissimilar to the Soviet system. The Soviet system wouldn't allow private ownership of property because that was profiteering, or private ownership of production, because again, the benefits would accrue disproportionately to the investors, or the people with the expertise, or the people who invented whatever. And if the people owned it, even though they would pay the same prices, and would be treated like shit in the factories and so on, as long as the people owned it, or as long as some private people didn't make the profits from rental on real estate, or again production, then it was deemed as equity. But really, the people were paying the same sort of rents and having the same struggle to make ends meet from their paychecks as they would have in the private sector, if not more so. But the difference is that the people at the very bottom did better, and this idea of a propertied, moneyed class at the top making the most, that was removed. But in reality, the privations of the population, particularly the middle and the upper middle, they were greater than they had been previously. So and it ended up in the Soviet workers' joke of, we pretend to work and they pretend to pay us. But this price gouging thing is more and more. Even if you look at something like, say, takeout food chains that are now sort of international. You look at the price of a takeout food meal, those combo meals and so on. You look at those in Australia today, then compare them to how it would be in, say, downtown, I don't know, Moscow, or downtown Tokyo, or anywhere around the world. It doesn't matter. You look, and the price of these meal combos varies differently, substantially. Like in one country, they're I'll use US dollars as the common denominator here, but in one country they're $11, but in the other country they're $3 for the same thing. Now, I appreciate wage differences and other things that may go into it, but it still comes out to the capacity to pay, and that centrally predetermined, pre-organized structure of the economy. So what we have to pay for all our goods and services in Australia isn't determined by market forces or availability or efficiencies or anything like that. It's determined through a centrally controlled pricing policy. Being with Tacitus today, your Pushback channel. Thank you for listening.